Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Geoff White, and I'm the Blameless CRE lead here. And you are here for the Advanced Incident Management Workshop. I'd like to welcome you all. Okay, let's get started. So what we're going to cover is we're going to talk about the incident command system, its history. Then we're going to go into a little bit about the anatomy of what incidents are, what incident states are, and severity levels. This is probably not new stuff for you ICs out there or for you people who are in incident response teams, but we're just going to go over this for review. Then we're going to talk about incident roles, the basics, and then some of the advanced roles. And then the meat of this talk is going to be about how to resolve incidents faster. And then in the end, we're going to talk about postmortems, or as some people call them, after action reports. So where did the incident command system come from? So it was developed in 1970 to deal with California wildfires. As a lot of things in California, we tend to pioneer new ideas, new events, and this is no different. It's evolved into a superset that the federal government, especially FEMA, has adopted called the National Incident Management System. It's used nationwide right now as a process to deal with all kinds of incidents, from major hurricanes and earthquakes down to local things that happen in the fire department. So what is ICS? It is a standard structure to deal with incidents. It's used, as I said, in fire departments, but also in major events, such as Burning Man. I was an incident commander, a shift commander, and a ranger captain in the early days of Burning Man from 1996 to 1999. ICS is used to coordinate multiple stakeholders to achieve a common goal. It's been tried and true since the 1970s to handle incidents in many theaters of operation. Let's start. There are two definitions of incidents that we're going to work with. One, the physical definition defined by the National Fire Protection Association, and then one that we use here in IT, and we're going to use the ITIL definition. Not that it's the most relevant, but it's a good place to start. So an incident is defined as an occurrence, either human or a natural phenomenon that requires action or support by emergency services. So emergency services in the real world of fire departments, police departments, paramedics, whatnot, to prevent or minimize loss of life or damage, or to property and or natural resources. Usually in the IT world, we're not dealing with loss of life, but we could be dealing with loss of revenue from the sites that we are operating. So let's talk about incident time. Incidents are not day-to-day operation time. The org chart that you have in a normal, everyday workday doesn't apply during an incident. Incidents require a particular set of special rules. The incident commander is the person who is solely in charge of the incident, regardless of what the org chart is before the incident happens. Incident commanders have special duties. They are the ones that decide when the incident starts. They are the ones who decide when to progress the incident to various states, and they are the ones that decide when the incident is resolved. So let's talk about incident states. All incidents are started at creation time. Usually an individual creates the incident, but it can be triggered by automation. It could be triggered by monitoring. It could be triggered by customers calling in. Once the incident starts, it moves through some predefined states: investigating, identified, monitoring, or resolved. So you know we have two different versions here. Some people like to resolve the incident and then put the incident into a monitoring state. There's a lot of discussion over this, and maybe we can talk about this after the workshop is over. I prefer to use identified followed by monitoring and then followed by resolve. Some people don't like this because it extends the MTTR of the incident much longer because you're including the monitoring time. Let's talk a little bit about incident severity levels. Severity level 0. Severity level 0 is urgent. In the real world, it's considered a major disaster, such as a major earthquake, the aftermath of a hurricane, or a terrorist attack. In IT, it's reserved for production down. Severity 0 is a serious matter. It's not to be used lightly. It's not to be used to impress your friends or your customers. It's a very serious situation. When you enter Sev 0, no one's going home that night until someone's relieving them. If the executives are away, maybe they're flying back on planes. Generally, when this is happening, the livelihood of the company or enterprise is at stake. So you should not use it lightly. Sev 1 is a high priority incident. Most customer production issues fall under Sev 1. Teams are assembled. The incident may or may not be worked on a 24/7 basis. Depends on the SLA that you have with your customers. It depends on the rules that you have inside of your company. Often the primary goal is to stabilize the situation and mitigate issues as they develop. And a primary goal could be to move the incident out of investigating into identified. It's important that you have a sound incident action plan in place when you start Sev 1 incidents. What we mean by this is that you should really know or have a hypothesis of how this is going to unfold, who's investigating what, and what needs to happen in order to move the incident along. Severity 2 incidents are medium. In the real world, this could be a thunderstorm where trees are down, power lines are down. It's usually not an immediate threat to life, but things could develop into a situation where hospitals are out of power or whatnot. In the IT world, it's a non-production issue. So in other words, revenue is still being generated, but it is something that needs to be addressed immediately. A good example of this is when you have a load balancer hardware failure on one of the nodes. Everything is still operating, but you really need to address it because you're now working in a state where if you had a second failure, you really could wind up having a Sev 0. Severity level 3 is often considered a maintenance window. These are not incidents that will trigger revenue loss. These are things that you're doing either to shore up your existing infrastructure, do things to improve infrastructure. This is often considered a maintenance severity. You want to monitor the situation. You maybe don't produce a postmortem or after action report afterwards, but you do want to record everything that went down, what people were doing, and you will have evidence at the end of this. Before we talk about incident roles, let's just go back and talk about why we have 4 levels of incidents. So 4 levels come from the definitions that originally started in the National Incident Management System. People like to feel that the number 4 is easy for humans under duress to remember. It's easy to remember what severity level you're in at the time. When you have more than that, then you don't want to get in a situation where you're asking, well, are we in an incident 5 or are we in incident 7? So we've kind of standardized on 4. I know that there are some organizations, especially in IT, that have more than 4, but what I've noticed is that when we actually look at the incidents, the extra numbers are usually finer grained versions of, say, SEV3 or SEV2. Let's talk about the basic roles. Incident commander, comms lead, and technical lead. So most people know what incident commander is. An incident commander takes complete ownership of the outcome of the incident. You are your reputation as far as an incident commander. It may be good, it may be bad. It'll follow you as you proceed. An incident commander doesn't have to be the most technical person in the room or even in the organization, but they do need to have training, and they also need to have something that ICs called command presence. In other words, they have to be willing to take control and make decisive action. They have to be able to do this in a calm manner without getting emotional and without causing, as some people would call, drama. The incident commander is responsible initially for assembling the response team and for all the initial communication coming in or out of the incident. They are the single source of truth of what's happening. Often they are the ones who develop and maintain the incident action plan, and they manage and update the CAN report. Incident commanders generally, this is a famous one, I had to put this in for some of you. This guy is Gene Kranz. He was the flight controller of Gemini and Apollo almost 50 years ago today. He is, I don't know if he actually really said it or not, but he is the one who is attributed to saying the term failure is not an option. Let's talk about the communications lead. So when an incident commander starts, the first thing they really should do is dedicate and delegate communication to a comms lead. Generally, the incident commander should be looking at the big picture of the incident, and they should have another person who's handling communications in and out of the incident and informing them of updates, what people outside the incident may want. The communications lead is communicating with the executive organization. They're similar to a public information officer, but literally they are the voice of the IC. All information should flow through the communications lead, and the communications lead is the person who decides whether the information is relevant to actually get to the incident commander. This is a famous communications lead. Some of you may know her from the Star Trek days. Let's talk about the technical lead. So the technical lead is expected to be a subject matter expert. Usually the technical lead is very proficient about a particular area where the incident is occurring. So you may have a network incident that involves a technical SME. The technical lead is the IC of the technical effort. So the incident commander should not be getting their hands dirty in technical details. That is the purpose of the technical lead. The technical lead is there to manage other SMEs, to give status, to direct the resolution and the mitigation of the incident. The technical lead advises the IC on technical decisions and gives updates to the IC. So one way you could look at this is the technical lead is the hands of the IC. The technical lead doesn't run the incident. That is still the purview of the incident commander, and they defer to the incident commander for policy and planning decisions. Sometimes the technical lead is called the operations lead or ops. They coordinate the technical response to the incident, and they are in the weeds, so the IC doesn't have to. Some of you may recognize this guy as a famous technical lead. So you've heard me talk about an IAP. What is an IAP? IAP is the incident action plan. Generally, you have an action plan that's developed before the incident, but the IAP is flexible because it's just a blueprint for what you're going to do if such and such an incident happens. It can be modified while the incident is in progress. A good IAP may be something like a checklist or a run book, but bear in mind that incidents have a tendency to not follow a normal operating procedure. So IAPs have to be flexible. You have to have the ability to modify them while the incident is going on. CAN reports. CAN stands for Condition, Actions, and Needs. These are updates that should be distributed on a periodic basis. They should be distributed to personnel who are entering the incident, and they can be distributed to executive or other people outside of the incident at the discretion of the incident commander. The format, once it's established, shouldn't change, and it should be updated accordingly. So it should be the type of incident, current status of the incident, summary, the blast radius, in other words, how many customers may be impacted or how many organizations are impacted, what's being done to mitigate the situation, who is doing it, and then what additional personnel or resources are needed. So those are the basics. Now let's talk about advanced incident roles. So we've already talked about the incident commander, we've talked about the comms lead, and we've talked about the technical lead. So there are two new roles that are here. One is the scribe, and one is the SME. So most people know what SME is. SME is subject matter expert. Many of you are subject matter experts out there. A good subject matter expert has the ability to troubleshoot and fix problems in their domain. They're generally a master of a particular area, i.e. database or networks or SDN or storage. And they are a engineering resource to work in and to help resolve the incident. They take directive from the technical lead, or if no technical lead, directly from the IC. A good SME leaves a good trail for the postmortem. So in other words, a good SME is gathering evidence. Even if they don't need it at the time, they're gathering this evidence because when the postmortem happens, you're going to use that to really determine what happened, how well the response happened, and what the performance of various roles in the matter were. Technical SMEs communicate with the rest of the responders. So they are members of a larger team. So in this diagram, you can see that everyone reports to the technical lead. The technical lead may themselves be an SME. They may actually be doing work, but they have to hold the entire effort in their head. And then the technical lead will delegate tasks to various SMEs in the process. So this is a relatively new role. Probably not a lot of you have heard of this one, a scribe. So a scribe's not a person who's actually giving input into the incident. They're not an actor in the incident. In real life, you might look at them as a stenographer in a courtroom. That person may not be a lawyer. They're there to keep track of what's going on. So the scribe is there to record, there to remind maybe people, notify people of how much time has passed. They're there to gather evidence, to archive the evidence, to make sure that log file snippets or other requests are saved. They can also go out and fetch things for the SMEs and the technical leads. They are the ones who are the repository. They hold on to the evidence. They take directives from the incident commander or the comms lead, and they passively communicate with the rest of the responders. So generally, a scribe is a person that maybe an SME will say, zip up these log files and put them in the evidence bin. That's something that a scribe does. Scribes can be actual humans, or these days they can actually be automation. So let's talk a little bit about where roles can go in emerging incident command. So we've talked about scribes, we've talked about SMEs. I have this box here. I haven't really thought of a good way to describe this. I'm not sure if this is really a role or if it's actually a process. But basically what I'm trying to indicate here is that you may have an SME who in turn acts sort of as a sub-technical lead, and the technical lead may dispatch an SME and a team to do research on maybe a particular hypothesis or solution during a major incident. So the SME, the people who are working on the SME kind of constitute sort of a sub-incident in and of themselves. They may go off and do different processes, do different things, and then report back to the SME, who in turn reports back to the technical lead. So an example of this might be where the technical lead asks an SME to prototype a particular fix, or may ask an SME to start building this particular patch, knowing that it's going to take 20 or 30 minutes for the patch to be ready to deploy. You should get that started now, even if you decide later on not to use the patch. So right now, I'm basically calling this particular area a swim lane or a research sub-incident, but I haven't necessarily defined what those actual roles are. They would definitely be under an SME. So someone just said a great example of this is also crucial during triage. Everyone go look at your own area of expertise and report back you have something that could be causing this. That's a great idea. Thanks for that, Lauren. So if you're in a situation where you really are still in investigating, you have not identified what the cause of the issue is, a technical lead can run off and tell people, okay, you go investigate this team go investigate that, this team go investigate that, and report back to me within a particular period of time. So the important part here is that research sub-incidents or swim lanes usually have a time limit on them. The technical lead or the incident commander is giving the SME and the team, say, take 10 minutes and give me an answer to this. When the 10 minutes is over, either they have an answer or they don't. They may ask for more time, and the technical lead may decide that it's worthwhile or that it's no longer needed because they're exploring other avenues at the time. So let's move a little bit now to how to actually start to resolve incidents faster. So for an IC, ICs have a special relationship with time. Time is your partner, it can be your friend, or it can be your foe. If you're in an earthquake situation, we have a term called the golden day, which means that if there's severe damage and maybe there are people buried under things, we know that the best chance for those people to survive is if we dig them out within 24 hours of the incident. So usually that is, at that point, time is on your side if you can activate and manage to get teams assembled and get people working as fast as possible. It's also your foe because you know that as you get further into that 24 hours and as you get near the end of that 24 hours, the likelihood of people surviving is going to go down. In a production situation, if there's a SEV 0 or a SEV 1 and production is down, often revenue can be lost and you're hemorrhaging potentially by the minute, especially if it's an e-commerce site. So in this case, it's imperative for the incident to be resolved as fast as possible. And the IC's job is to manage time accordingly. So they become a master of time management. So I'm going to talk about my version of the anatomy of an incident. And as always, we start with time. So here's kind of a slightly busy chart, but you can see that the incident is often bracketed by normal operation. So ideally, you would like, in the ideal world, in Nirvana, there would only be normal operation. There would never be incidents, but that's not necessarily the case. What we do have is MTBF, mean time between failure. And it's desirable to have this be as long as possible, right? So mean time between failure is the duration of time from when the last incident was solved to the time when the next incident is solved. So ideally, we want the incident to last for as short as possible so that the MTBF can be quite long. Incident time is the MTRS, the mean time to restore service. The clock starts when the incident happens. The clock is over when you return to normal time. So this area in here, MTRS, is indeed the incident time, or as some people would call it, wartime or extraordinary time. MTRS can be subdivided into two main categories: MTTD, mean time to diagnose, and MTTR, mean time to resolution. MTTD can further be divided into MTTA, which we have a lot of control over, and it's not shown here, but mean time to resolution. There's a gap here between MTTA and MTTD, and we're going to talk about that, even though I haven't defined it as an acronym here. Below here, we can see the incident is progressing. When the incident starts, you're in the investigating state. Once you kind of figure out what's going on and maybe you have a hypothesis for solving it, it moves to identified. And then finally, when the incident is resolved, you can go to resolve or to monitoring. And then you're in normal operation until the next failure. So let's drill a little bit down into MTTA and MTTD. So first of all, MTTA, mean time to acknowledge, assist, or action. You can choose whichever A you'd like to assign to that. It's not the same as MTTD, which is the mean time to diagnosis. How do you decrease your MTTA? Improve monitoring, a panic button for customer support. So often, mean time to assemble, mean time to acknowledge is the thing that you can control the most, right? Once the customer calls in, how fast can you get your team assembled and working on the problem? If the customer calls in at 12:03 and you don't have a team assembled until 1:03, then your MTTA is 1 hour, but that's just too long. So how do you decrease that? There are things that, like automatic incident triggering, where an incident is triggered, the team is assembled, and then they can decide whether to continue with the incident or to terminate the incident. The idea here is that you're trying to get the team assembled and deployed and ready for action as fast as possible. In the real world, the MTTA is the time from when you dial 911 to the time that the fire department EMTs are at your door. So in many metropolitan areas, they like to try to keep this to around 4 minutes. How else do you decrease this? You can have automatic response team alerting, paging. You can automate the construction of the infrastructure that you need to deal with an incident, like chat and voice bridge, starting up tickets automatically. The main thing that really helps you decrease MTTA is if you establish the procedures that you're going to use, and then you practice them in normal time so that the entire process is well honed. So let's talk a little bit about MTTR, what's highlighted here in yellow. Mean time to resolution. So this is often an elusive thing. This is the thing that maybe you don't have a lot of control over. You've identified what the problem is, but now you have to fix it. Hopefully, if you're lucky, the hypothesis that you formed is indeed going to fix it. You try it, you deploy it, and it works. But if it doesn't work, then what do? If you have a plan B, maybe because you had another swim lane investigate that plan B, you can say, okay, everyone switch to plan B. You still are in an identified state and you can still proceed to try that next hypothesis if you've developed a plan B. The worst case is you need to go back to the investigating state and start looking all over again. So that's going to extend your MTTR out. How do you decrease your MTTR? You can have codified incident process, that always helps. Proper training of your IR team, and then practicing mock incidents. Practice, practice, practice. The main thing that you really need to have a well-oiled team is to have discipline when you're inside of the incident. I know some of you don't like the term discipline, so maybe a better, softer term might be consistency and dedication, if that's more palatable. But either way, this is a characteristic that you actually need to decrease your MTTR. People have to know what their roles are, they can't get excited, and they have to follow up. They have to follow up on what they say they're gonna do, and they basically need to know exactly where they are in the process, and what people can count on them to do. The other thing that's very important for MTTRs is to archive, analyze, and above all, learn from your postmortems or your after action reports. Postmortems are gold. Some people say don't let a good incident go to waste. So what you have in your postmortems, you actually get to mine, you get to look at that, you get to see how people respond, you get to see what went right and what went wrong. Oh, and by the way, like I said, the most important thing to decrease your MTTR is to have discipline. So to sum up this section, without a predictable way to respond to incidents, any organization growing or mature is at risk. So it's very important for all of us to have a very good defined way to respond to incidents. It makes a difference between how long an incident lasts, whether the same incident happens over and over again, and ultimately how agile the corporation can become. So let's talk about postmortems or AARs. So what's in the name? So some people don't like the term postmortems. The military doesn't like this term. The fire department doesn't use this term. Fire departments in the military tend to like the term AAR, after action report. Some companies use RCA. Some companies use TIR, technical incident reports. The name is not so important, but what's really important is how are the postmortems conducted? What questions are asked and what answers are sought. A lot of people in postmortems will focus on the technical aspects of what broke or pieces of equipment that failed, or get into debates over how this particular service didn't perform or it needs to be refactored. But really one of the most important things in a postmortem is how did the team to respond to what was broken. In other words, the duration of the incident is not so much about the technical pieces that failed, because failure is always anticipated. what you really need to look at is how the team as a whole responded to the failure and how the team as a whole responded in the incident. Those are the things that you have the most control over, and those are the things that you can factor on and iterate on so that your team responds and gets better as time goes on. Another few aspects of the postmortem. During the incident, the IC's job in a postmortem is to look ahead to when the postmortem is actually going to be constructed after the incident. So it's very important for the IC to gather evidence, or better yet, to encourage the gathering of evidence. And how do they do that? They ask appropriate questions and they record the response. Maybe they're not recording the response, but the scribe may be recording the response, or the comms officer. They are leading the incident by getting reports and making sure that those reports are codified and archived in the incident, with the express purpose that you're going to revisit this during the AAR. I can't underemphasize enough that it's important to gather evidence, even though you may not think that the evidence is important at the time. During an incident where you're mitigating and you're not actually fixing something, it's the evidence that you're going to have that you're going to delve into to actually try to find what the true and real root cause is, so that your follow-up actions can be things to actually fix problems as opposed to just patch it waiting for the next incident to happen. You're going to use your postmortems to reduce your MTTA. So you're doing this by looking at how the team responds, how the team behaved during the initial aspects of the incident, and tuning that so that your MTTA decreases. Maybe you need to get people on pager duty. Maybe you notice that certain people who were paged didn't show up. Maybe you notice that the escalation policy for the particular team is out of date and some of the people no longer work at the company. All those things should show up in the postmortem, and all those things are things that can be fixed quite easily. So let's talk about how you can use postmortems to improve some of these numbers. So in order to improve the mean time to diagnosis, you really want to focus on the human process failure than the technical. Did people start arguing? Did people go down rabbit holes and start having discussions that were not relevant to the issues at hand? You need to make sure that if there are action items that are triggered during the postmortem, that they're followed up on. And you need to immediately add the findings into the incident response process. So in other words, if you find that that people are not playing well together, you really need to address that before the next incident happens. Maybe you need to update your monitoring so that you could capture the incident sooner. Maybe you discovered that this incident happened because your customers are calling in. Is there a way that you could fix your monitoring so that you would capture the unfolding process before a customer calls in? Those are all things that you can do with your postmortem to improve your MTTD, mean time to diagnosis. In order to improve your mean time to resolution, look at the timelines in your postmortem and determine where the time was wasted. So look in there, determine whether you spent a lot of time arguing or debating what to do. Maybe rather than debating a particular thing, you should dispatch 2 different SMEs to investigate both avenues and then report back, while another SME starts to do something else, right? That way you throw away one of those hypotheses, but you go with another one. And you can always come back and use that one that you threw away, even if the initial one is shown to not be correct or actionable. After the postmortems, make sure you update your run books and automation to remediate similar incidents faster. So if you have an incident, you learn from your postmortem, you learn to capture those incidents so that they no longer become incidents. Or if they were SEV1s, they become SEV2s or SEV3s. They become maintenance events as opposed to production down or production degraded events. And then in order to improve MTRS, make sure your technical action items are planned and executed on. I know we all have backlog. This is where working on the backlog really helps to improve your mean time to restore service, because very often factors that show up in postmortems that need to be fixed are not acted upon quickly, so they wind up in backlog, which just means that this stuff is just sitting there for the next incident to be triggered because we haven't gotten around to it. Look at your postmortems to find patterns of weakness. Look at your postmortems to see if there's a particular monitoring system that always gives false negatives or false positives. Look to see if you really need to update some entries in your log files because they're not posting the message that you would really need or the error that you really need in order to get to or resolve the incident or problem faster. And then once again, one of the most important things that you can do is practice on similar mock incidents. So once you have this incident is complete, you can create a mock incident that's similar to this one and practice on that to see if you can actually get this time, get the incident time reduced. Practice is a great thing. It actually can be a team building event. It's usually a lot less stressful than the actual incident at the time. So, in summary, I pulled this out of the Site Reliability Engineering book, but it's applicable for all of us. So, in an incident, the first thing you want to do is stop the bleeding, right? You want to stop the hemorrhaging. You want to get the system online as soon as possible, even if the particular problem isn't fixed. So this is not a time to do deep architectural refactoring. This is a time for the patch to get the service restored. Be mindful that you do want to capture logs. Try not to be so destructive so that later on you can go back in your after action report and try to discover the proper way to fix these things. Prepare and develop documentation for your incident management procedure. Have this codified and then practice it. I don't know how many organizations I've seen that really don't have any kind of defined incident management process. This will make everything in your life better. You have to trust the people in your incident response team, especially the incident commander, and especially the officers of the company, the directors and managers or whatever. When the IC is handling the incident, they are the ones in control. If you have a better idea, then what you need to do is convince the IC that your idea is better. It's not appropriate for you to go in and demand that the IC do what you say. You need to trust that they are going to do the right thing. Pay attention to your emotional state when responding to an incident. Incidents are not a time for yelling. It's not a time to get angry at people. You can save that for after the postmortem. You really need to have a blameless outlook when the incident is going on. It's not a time for assigning blame. It's not a time, even if someone says, well, you know, I updated this router and I didn't tell anybody. It's not a time to point fingers then. It's time to say, okay, this is what's happened. Let's restore the previous configuration and let's add a process in so that that person can update the router and not tell anybody in the future. Practice, practice, practice. Use the process routinely so that it becomes second nature. And then the last thing is train your other people to be incident commanders. If you have a peerless incident commander, that person should be training other people to be just as good as they are. So I'm going to take some questions and answers now. Anybody, if you guys want to reach out to me at a later time, I'm available here at Blameless, Geoff W. at Blameless, and you can always come and visit blameless.com. We're going to have an SRE South Bay meetup on July 25th, so be sure to get information on that. And our next workshop is going to be on July 30th. So are there any questions?